Boldwood presents Moonlight Over Studland Bay, written by Della Galton, and read by Laura Kerman. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Sam Jones was beginning to feel a great deal more stress than she had when she had left Beach Cottage, her home overlooking Studland Bay, in one of the most beautiful spots in Dorset, 15 minutes earlier. Her hands felt slippery on the steering wheel. It was hot for June, plus, annoyingly, a section of her long hair had escaped from its butterfly clip and was flicking round her face as she drove. This was because all of the car windows were down. Abby, who was half sitting, half lying on the back seat, had said she needed the air. "Can't you drive any bloody faster, Sam? I'm in agony here." She glanced in the rear-view mirror and saw that her best friend and housemate, they'd met in Year 7 and had been inseparable ever since, was thrashing about. Her head was thrown back, her white blonde hair fanned out against the headrest, and her flushed face was screwed up in a very good impression of someone in agony. But, as Abby was prone to exaggeration, if not a full-on drama queen, Sam was nowhere near as worried as she might otherwise have been. Sometimes she thought the only thing she and Abby now had in common was the fact they were both 36. They had been born exactly a month apart, Sam on 10th of May and Abby on 10th of June. A month had a lot to answer for in astrology terms. Not that Sam put as much faith in astrology as Abby did. This morning, Abby's 3-word fun horoscope, which she read every day on her app, had said, "Don't go yet." Abby, as ever, had put her faith in that until she couldn't hold off any longer, which is why they were racing along in the car now. "Honey, half an hour ago, you didn't want to come," Sam pointed out gently. "You were dead set on having a home birth, and I can't drive any faster. It won't do us any good if I crash." Also, she was worried about the 2 mousetraps, both of which contained live mice, which she'd just remembered were on the back seat of the car in a brown paper bag. The traps were shut, but if they tipped off the seat, they might open and release their cargo, and Abby was terrified of mice. If there was one thing worse than having a pain-ridden Abby in labour in her car, it was having a pain-ridden and panic-stricken Abby in labour in her car. Sam knew she should have moved the humane mousetraps before they'd set out, but in all the panic of racing around the house, gathering up all the stuff that Abby hadn't bothered packing because no way am I having an unnatural hospital birth, it had slipped her mind that they were there. Fortunately, they hadn't been in situ very long. She had planned to release the occupants in the woods on her way back to get Abby, before she'd realised quite how urgent things had become. "Anyway," Sam added, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt, "first babies always take their time. You've got hours yet." Not that she was any kind of expert, most of her knowledge having been gleaned from one born every minute. "I bloody well better not have," Abby snapped, pausing from writhing to glare at her. "Anyway, you don't know anything about it. You haven't had one, and don't start telling me that dogs don't make all this fuss, because I'm not a dog. I'm a woman, and it's different for a woman. When we get there, I want an epidural and a cesarean, and I want one of them injections that numbs you from the neck down, and I want some gas in there too, a bucket load, and, for God's sake, that was an amber light. Why are we stopping?" It was red. Sam took the chance to refasten her hair back out of her face. She was well used to Abby's outbursts. "How long is it between contractions?" "I don't know. I haven't got a stopwatch. I'm going to have it on the back seat if you don't hurry up." She groaned dramatically. "It bloody hurts. I know that. Ew. Fuck. Can you please just bloody well hurry up?" Her voice disappeared into a long wail as she thrashed about, and Sam thought she heard the thud of something falling off the back seat. Hopefully it was Abby's bag and not the one with the mousetraps in. "Count," Sam suggested, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel and wishing the red light would change. "Start counting now and see how long it is between contractions. That's the first thing they'll ask us." At least that's what she remembered from the antenatal classes Abby had dragged her along to. You could be a bit more sympathetic. Sam put the handbrake on and turned in her seat to study her friend's red, sweaty face. I am. I'm very sympathetic, honestly, but there's absolutely no point in us both getting in a state. I am not in a state. The lights have changed. Try and pay attention. Do you think I should take my knickers off to save time? No, Sam said, putting her foot down and resisting the urge to say there probably wasn't much point as Abby was also wearing pink super-stretch maternity leggings, unless she intended to streak across the hospital car park naked from the waist down. Are you still counting? Perhaps she ought to be counting too, she thought anxiously. But it was difficult to navigate through the seaside traffic, drive safely, be sympathetic and stay calm, as well as to count when she had a deranged woman flailing about in the back of her car. Abby was hard enough to deal with when she had a headache. Sam's mobile blared from somewhere behind her seat. She glanced in her rear-view mirror, relieved to see Abby's face was no longer contorted in pain. Any chance you could get that? Perhaps it might help to distract her from what was happening. This hope was rudely dashed 2 seconds later when Abby snatched up the phone and yelled, "F off!" at the top of her voice. Sam sighed. Who is it? Your boss, I think. Please tell me you're joking. It sounded like him. You'll have to tell him it was extenuating circumstances. Anyway, he shouldn't be phoning you on your afternoon off. Realising she was in the wrong lane, Sam nipped in front of a black 4x4, ignoring the driver's furious horn blowing. It's not my afternoon off. I said I had raging toothache and I'd got an emergency appointment with my dentist. She hadn't told Rex Fielding that she was responding to a panic-stricken call from Abby, because when she'd got the call just before lunch, she hadn't been 100% sure Abby was actually in labour. There had been several false alarms so far, and she wanted to save the official Mercy Dash day off for a time when she really needed it. Hopefully, it hadn't been Rex. Are we nearly there? I don't think I can hold on much longer. We're very nearly there, Sam soothed, indicating to turn into the road that led to the hospital. And you are going to stay with me, aren't you? You're not dashing back to work. Abby sounded vulnerable for the first time. Of course I'm going to stay with you. Even if it takes 26 hours? I thought you said it was going to be born any minute, Sam said, pulling up in a drop-off bay outside the hospital and wondering if she was still supposed to buy a ticket. Yes, well, I might have got that wrong. I've never had a baby before. Shocked because the scream was ear-splitting, even by Abby's standards, Sam leaned into the back. Stay there. I'll go and get a wheelchair and a doctor. But Abby wasn't listening. She'd snatched her legs up onto the back seat and was pointing at something in the rear footwell. There's a bloody mouse in your car. I just saw its tail. She grabbed Sam's hand, her eyes wide with horror. I'm not staying in here with a mouse. You wait. I'll get the wheelchair. As she spoke, she shuffled across the seat, the pain of labour obviously totally eclipsed by her terror of mice, and flung open the door. Sam leapt out of the driver's seat into the hot tarmac-scented air, just in time to see a cute brown field mouse, no bigger than a matchbox, hop down onto the wheel arch and twitch its nose curiously. Abby screamed again, and the mouse, presumably deciding enough was enough, having already endured the 40-minute drive with Abby's pain-filled monologue, skipped onto the tarmac and then scurried up onto the ramp that led up to the main entrance, causing 2 paramedics to sidestep rapidly. I just saw a rat, exclaimed a young mother with a blue-coated toddler. There must be vermin all over the hospital. She scooped up her child and started muttering about the failing standards of the NHS. Sam kept her head down, relieved that at least the woman hadn't seen it emerging from her car, and prayed to all the gods in heaven that the other mouse was still safely in its trap. Why didn't you tell me there was a mouse in your car? Abby accused. What's it doing in there anyway? We've had a bit of a mouse problem at work, Sam said, relieved that Abby hadn't asked if there were any more. I've been catching them in live mouse traps, and you have to release them 2 miles away or they come back, so I've been dropping them off in the woods on my way home. Why can't you use poison like normal people? sometimes I think you rate all creatures higher than humans. What do you mean, them? Because it's cruel, Sam said, avoiding answering the second question. Are you getting out, or shall I find a wheelchair? She crouched by the open door, her eyes fixed on Abby's face. Her friend's damp blonde hair was stuck in tendrils to her forehead as she screwed up her eyes once more and braced against the pain. I'm scared, Abby panted when it had passed. I don't think I want to go into hospital anymore. I hate hospitals. What if something goes wrong? Nothing's going to go wrong, and even if it did, you're in the right place. The very best place. Sam was aware that her voice had taken on a maternal, soothing tone in response to the childlike fear in Abby's. You promise you won't leave me? You really, really promise? I really, really promise. She caught hold of Abby's hand again and squeezed her hot fingers. I'm going to be right beside you for every push and every pain. We're going to have this baby together, okay? Abby smiled for the first time since Sam had arrived home an hour and a half earlier, and Sam smiled back reassuringly. She had a feeling it was going to be a very long day. 19 hours and 36 minutes later, at 11:15 a.m. on 24th of June, which also happened to be Midsummer's Day, literally the longest day of the year, Abby finally pushed her son into the world, and Sam, who couldn't remember the last time she'd cried, found that her neck was wet with tears of joy and wonder. She felt weak with exhaustion and lack of food. She'd kept her promise and hadn't left the delivery room, except to go to the loo and to free the second mouse from her car at a reasonable distance from the hospital. She didn't want to be responsible for a vermin problem. She'd also tried to phone Rex, but her battery had been flat by the time she'd remembered she should call work. Never mind. She was sure he'd understand when she explained. Her throat was hoarse from shouting encouragement, and her forearm was covered with finger mark bruises. But wow, was it worth it? Even in her most idealistic rose-tinted glasses moments, which she had to admit she was prone to, Sam had never imagined that seeing a baby come into the world could be so amazing. She'd expected it to be bloody and messy and involve a lot of yelling, and it had. Abby wasn't one to do anything quietly, and no amount of pain relief was going to stop her letting an opportunity to do a lot of legitimate screaming slip through her fingers. But Sam had watched in awe as the slithering pink baby had been gently placed in his mother's arms. Her throat had closed with tears as she'd seen something switch on in Abby's eyes. Love, she had realised in wonderment. Abby had looked down into her son's red, screwed-up face, and in that flick of a moment, everything had changed. Peace had ironed out all the lines of pain on Abby's brow, and there had been a huge sense of joy in the room. Such intense joy that it was almost holy. Sam wouldn't have been at all surprised to see an angel with a halo standing at the foot of the bed playing a harp, and she didn't even believe in angels. Life, new life just beginning. Wondrous, magical, rapturous. Amazing new life with all the hope and optimism and years of possibilities that it brought with it. The midwife was smiling, Abby was smiling, the delivery room itself was smiling. How many new lives had these walls welcomed, Sam wondered. How much pain, too. All that intense emotion swirling about. Heaven and hell meeting. She shook her head and swiped tears from her eyes. Why on earth was she thinking about heaven and hell? She must be more exhausted than she thought. What? Abby demanded. I was just thinking that you were right, Sam said, blinking. It's nothing like dogs. The midwife shot them a curious glance but didn't comment on this. She probably already thought they were crazy. During Abby's early labour, which seemed like a lifetime ago now, rather than a mere 18 or so hours, she had insisted they sing 10 green bottles between contractions, followed by always look on the bright side of life. Towards the end, she'd spent the time in between screaming that she no longer wanted a baby and swearing, whole chains of swear words strung together so that most of them were indistinguishable. Fortunately. Not that Sam had anything against swearing, Women in labour were entitled to swear, although Abby's profanities were, perhaps, a little too colourful for a hospital. But maybe midwives were used to the eccentricities of women in labour. None of them had batted an eyelid. Sam wondered if they ever got bored of this moment, the pinnacle of all that effort, when one life miraculously became two separate ones. She couldn't imagine ever getting bored of it. Perhaps she should change career and become a midwife instead of an audio typist for a group of structural engineers. Not that she planned to stay an audio typist for very much longer. That was just her day job. Her dreams lay elsewhere. She'd always loved animals, especially dogs, and just over 2 years ago she'd begun a business, Purbeck Pooches, which she hoped would one day become her full-time career. She walked dogs in every spare minute she had, early mornings, summer lunchtimes, and after work. She also did weekend boarding. Purbeck Pooches was her passion, and she ran it from her home at Studland on the Isle of Purbeck, where there was a footpath that ran down onto the beach. Her cottage came with a 1-acre field, and she rented both for a pittance because Ben Campbell, her landlord and also a good friend, needed a tenant who wouldn't complain about the place's numerous faults. She was building up a small but regular clientele, although things had slowed down a bit since Abby had moved in with her on a cold December night 6.5 months ago. Prior to that, Abby had shared a flat with her on-off boyfriend, Paul Kent, who was also the father of Abby's newborn son, and conspicuous by his absence today. It wasn't the first time Abby had turned up on Sam's doorstep in tears after they'd rowed, vowing never to go back to that waste of space wanker again. But this time had lasted longer than the rest. Sam had expected Paul, who was notoriously flaky and a mostly out-of-work musician, to come back into Abby's life as the birth approached, but he hadn't. This was a new level of flakiness, even for Paul, and although Abby made light of it, Sam suspected she was heartbroken beneath her bravado. Abby and Paul had been childhood sweethearts. They always got back together eventually. Much as she loved Abby, it had been harder to concentrate on Purbeck Pooches with her living at Beach Cottage. She'd been sidetracked by accompanying her to antenatal classes, having officially been recruited as Abby's birthing partner, and long early chats into the night weren't conducive to getting up at the crack of dawn to walk dogs. Despite this, Sam had started to get recommendations from happy clients. When she had a few more regular bookings, she planned to tell her boss to get lost herself. No, she wouldn't. Rex Fielding, owner of Fielding and Son Structural Engineers, was a bit pompous, but he wasn't a bad boss most of the time. She couldn't really blame him. He'd been expecting her back yesterday, and she should have started at 9 a.m. today. It was now nearly midday. For all Rex knew, she could be lying in a ditch somewhere, and after the rude response he'd got on the phone yesterday afternoon, he had every right to be a bit snotty. "Sam?" Abby's voice was as honey-soft sweetness now as it had been raucous, grating agony a little while earlier. "You know I said I was going to call him Jack after my granddad. Well, I think I'm going to make his middle name Sam after you. Samuel, not Samantha, obviously. What do you think? Jack Samuel Martin." "That sounds like a very fine name." Sam surreptitiously wiped another tear from her face. "And there's something else," Abby added. "What kind of something?" "Do you fancy being his godmother?" Sam looked down into the baby's squashed little face. He had a lot of dark hair. He must get that from his father. And he was so little, from his tiny curling fingers to his tiny pink toes. A mewling, vulnerable scrap of helplessness. She had never been a fan of babies, but now something twisted in the region of her heart. I'd really, really love that. Chapter 2. Sam was dreading going into work on Thursday morning. She had spoken briefly to Rex late the previous afternoon once she'd got back from the hospital and recharged her phone. She'd begun with an apology. Experience had taught her that if you just put your hands up straight away and said, "I'm really sorry, I mucked up, I am totally at fault," it usually worked in your favour. but it probably hadn't helped that she had caught him just dashing out of the office to an appointment. He had cut through her apologies. "Save it, Sam. I don't have time to do this now. We can talk tomorrow. I take it there are extenuating circumstances, and you didn't just decide to head for the beach to top up your tan." "There are, of course there are. As I said, save it for tomorrow. My office, 9 o'clock. "I would never just tomorrow." "Sure," she knew when she was beaten. "Tomorrow." She'd been talking to empty air. He'd already gone. And now it was tomorrow. There hadn't been time to wash her hair, which was prone to be flyaway, so she'd tugged it back into a stern and efficient-looking ponytail, rather than her normal colourful clips. She was wearing her most sensible, toned-down, stiff upper-lip office outfit, a white blouse with silver buttons, long black skirt, and herringbone jacket. It was a bit warm for the jacket, but she was wearing it anyway. Rex was a fan of the traditional, and although they didn't meet the public that often in their office, so they could wear what they wanted, she suspected he wasn't altogether approving of the ultra-casual outfits she occasionally wore in summer. She could do contrite when the occasion demanded it. She'd even ditched the rainbow earrings Abby had bought for her last birthday in favour of smallish silver hoops. The moment of reckoning had come. She walked nervously across the car park. Fielding and Son had second-floor offices on an out-of-town industrial estate just outside Swanage. They shared the building with a private dentist on the ground floor. You could occasionally hear the sound of drilling from below, and K.R. Lacey's accountancy services, which was on the same floor as them. The main entrance of the building led immediately to a flight of stairs, and then a second door led into their office space, which, apart from Rex's office, was open plan. Rex's office was tucked at the back, alongside the kitchen, and shielded from the main area by a glass wall. Sam had to pass the desks of the other 3 structural engineers on the way to her own workstation. None of them were in. They must all have gone straight out to jobs. Rex's PA, Alana Lewis, who was dark and petite with huge geek girl glasses and was super mature for her 27 years, had the desk just across the way from Sam's, and she glanced up as Sam arrived. Sam went over to talk to her. "What sort of mood is he in?" Alana widened her eyes so they looked even bigger behind the glasses, sucked in her cheeks and whistled softly. "Not great, but you know what he's like. He'll bag on for a bit about you letting him down and the good name of the company, blah, 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 and then he'll offer you a merriment and forgive you. He never loses his rag, but you did drop him in it." She leaned forwards. "Where were you, anyway?" "I was with Abby. She had the baby yesterday." "Oh, wow, really? What did she have?" Alana was a sucker for babies and all things cute. There was a picture of a fluffy cat in a stripy hat pinned on the notice board over her desk. "Boy, £7. Are they okay?" "Yes, they're doing great. Fingers crossed they're coming home today. I'm picking them up after work. They let them out early these days." She'd got the impression when she'd gone back to visit last night that the nurses would be glad to see the back of Abby. Maybe that was unfair, but she was a handful at the best of times, and Sam suspected she'd be treating her hospital stay like a visit to a hotel and expecting on-tap room service thrown in. She yawned and covered her mouth. "Sorry, I haven't had much sleep the last couple of days." She was going to have even less from now on, much as she was looking forward to having Abby and baby Jack at Beach Cottage for the foreseeable future. "I bet." "Shall I go in?" It was 5 to 9. "I'll tell him you're here." Alana picked up the phone on her desk. There was no need for her to do this, due to the fact there was only a glass partition between Rex's office and the main area where Alana's desk was. If he looked up, he would see her. But Rex was a man of protocol. He liked things to be done properly. He was only 42, but he acted like a man a decade older. He'd inherited Fieldings from his father when he was in his early 30s, and he'd taken the responsibility very seriously. "Our reputation is so concrete you can build on it." Rex was fond of trotting out this line at regular intervals, and it was also part of the company's branding, as was the line, "Our word is our bond." "You could go in," Alana said, hanging up after the briefest of conversations with Rex and crossing her fingers surreptitiously. "Good luck." Sam stepped into the little office, which smelled of old books and coffee, and still had battleship grey metal filing cabinets that looked as though they had been made at the end of the war. On the wall hung a portrait of an unsmiling man, Mr. Fielding Sr., who had started the company. Rex glanced up. Like his father, he had brown, slightly receding hair and sideburns, and he always wore a suit and tie. Today's tie was maroon. His blue-grey eyes were serious, but other than that, it was difficult to read his expression. "Samantha, take a seat." Oops. He only used her full name when he was cross. He came out from behind his ornate cherry-wood desk, which had clawed feet and fancy twirly bits on the corners, and pulled up one of the 2 wooden chairs that were on her side. Alana had once told her that the last book he'd read on management, which had belonged to his father and been published in 1998, had been called How to Deal with Staff Without Drama. His favourite chapter, apparently, had been the one that suggested barriers and boundaries were outmoded and should be avoided at all costs when talking to staff. He'd been greatly impressed with this and was still using these tactics, especially if he had to say anything unpleasant. Blimey, he wasn't going to give her a disciplinary, was he? She probably deserved one. He hadn't even offered her a Murray mint. He kept a bowl of them on his desk. He drank very strong coffee, but hated the aftertaste, apparently. Today it was clear that the Murray mints were not forthcoming. Feeling more nervous than ever, Sam sat and smoothed down her black wool-mix skirt. Well, it was the only place she ever wore a skirt. She was a jeggings and trainers girl, and decided that much as she wanted to blurt out another apology, it would probably be best to let him start the conversation. He cleared his throat. "I'd like to know where you've been for the last day and a half." Sam knew that she needed to tell him the truth, so she told him, and he listened thoughtfully without interrupting, while she laid it on as thick as she dared about the unexpectedness of Abby's labour and the high drama of being in the delivery room. She decided it would be best not to give any details about that, and how she'd completely lost track of time, and then her battery had gone dead, or she would, of course, have phoned him. When she'd finished, he said that he hoped mother and baby were doing well. "They are. But Samantha, what I don't understand is why you felt the need to lie to me about the dentist appointment. Could you not have been truthful?" She felt a rush of shame. Lying was one of his pet hates. She wasn't a huge fan of it either. "I wasn't sure that Abby was actually in labour. There had been a couple of false alarms. I thought it might be easier if—" She tailed off. The thinking that had seemed so rational the day before yesterday now seemed sly and underhand. "I'm sorry," she said, aware of his eyes on her. "I should have been honest." "Yes, you should. Our word is our bond. Trust is at the basis of all good working relationships." "I know," she felt about 2 inches high. "I'll make up the time, obviously. Heather had to cover for you, and she wasn't feeling at all well." No change there, then. Hypochondriac Heather, as they all secretly called her, was the other audio typist. She was always complaining about aches and pains and mysterious, untraceable symptoms that never came to anything. She was good at her job, though. Between them, Heather and Sam typed up and made sense of the convoluted and often lengthy structural surveys, filled with tricky terminology that, luckily, they were both au fait with, that the engineers gave them on a daily basis. They were usually voice files, so it wasn't just typing, but translation. Most of the engineers were aware of the difficulties and spoke clearly, but there was one, Mike, who mumbled, despite the subtle and not-so-subtle hints they'd made to him over the years. Sam hoped Heather hadn't been stuck with mumbling Mike surveys. She realised suddenly that Heather hadn't been at her desk either this morning. No doubt she had stayed at home then today with some imaginary illness, payback for Sam having an unauthorised day and a half off work. "Is she all right now?" Sam asked. "No. She had stomach pains, so I had to send her home." Rex's already grave voice went a shade graver. "In fact, I just had a phone call from her partner saying that she was rushed to hospital last night with suspected appendicitis." "Oh, my goodness." Sam felt guiltier than ever. Is she going to be okay? I'm sure she'll be fine. As soon as I get some more news, I will let you and everyone else know. There was another little silence. Sam would have preferred him to shout at her and pace about, but he wasn't the shouty, pace-about type. Finally, he broke it. There is a fair bit of work in your inbox, I should think. I would appreciate it if you could do the urgent ones at least today. Of course, I'm on it, Sam said, realising the meeting was over and getting to her feet with relief. And I'm really sorry again about not being honest. Your apology has been noted and accepted, Rex said, rubbing at a spot on one of his angular cheekbones as he met her gaze. She guessed he had found this whole discussion as excruciating as she had. She had never had much to do with Rex. In the 3 years that she'd worked at Fielding and Son, he had mostly been in his office when she arrived and still there when she left, unless he was out surveying. Even her annual reviews were dealt with in a matter of minutes. She'd only seen him out socially on a handful of occasions. The Christmas meals, a team bonding day out at Salisbury races once, and a summer meal that Alana had organised last year to celebrate the 40 years of Fielding and Son being in business. At all of them, he'd looked stiff and uncomfortable in the same kind of suit and tie he wore for work, and he'd made his excuses and left as soon as possible. She'd always had the impression he was far more at ease around buildings, the older the better, than people, and Alana was good at shielding him. It was only when she was on the other side of the door once more and heading towards her desk that she realised that he hadn't even mentioned being told to F off by a pain-ridden Abby. That was something. With a bit of luck, Abby had been wrong, and it hadn't been him on the other end of the phone after all. The call had been from a withheld number, so she hadn't been able to confirm one way or another. For the first time in ages, Sam didn't switch off her Mac on the dot of 5. She was still typing furiously at 5 to 6 when Rex went by with his laptop bag in his hand. He gave her a nod of acknowledgement. If you're later than Alana, get her to show you how to set the alarm. I will, she said, realising that she had never, in her entire time at Fielding and Son, been the last one to leave the building. She wasn't a slacker, but she religiously observed her working hours so she could get back to her real love, Purbeck Pooches. She carried on listening and typing, both of which she could do on autopilot, but she couldn't get Rex's comment out of her head. Flaming heck. Was she that much of a lightweight? What kind of nickname did they have for her? Everyone had a nickname in the office. Alana's was Geek Girl, Rex's was Suit Man, or Robo-Boss, if people were feeling mean. Andy Jakes, the senior surveyor who was in his 50s, was known as Lightning because he fitted more surveys into his day than anyone else and also had a habit of talking really fast. The young surveyor, James Carr, was known as Magpie because he had glossy, jet-black hair and was always stealing pens and borrowing bits of kit from the other surveyors. And of course, there was Mumbling Mike. For the first time, she wondered what her nickname was and why she didn't know already. Slope-off Sam, work-shy Sam, maybe. God, no, that way lies madness. Besides, she wasn't work-shy, she just had a job she loved at home. Not that Purbeck Pooches earned her much money. This job was her mainstay. Rex was a fair employer, and he paid well. She couldn't afford to lose her job. A cough from Alana interrupted her thoughts, and she realised she was standing on the other side of the desk and had possibly been trying to attract her attention for a while. Sam took her headset off. Sorry, did you want to show me the alarm? Please, if you're okay with that. I'd have thought you'd be rushing off to see the new arrival. Alana tilted her head to one side in a question. Or are you avoiding going home? I've just remembered you prefer puppies to babies, don't you? I'm not avoiding going home. I've got some serious grovelling to do to make up for the last couple of days, remember? I'm on the last survey with today's date on. But yes, you're right. I do prefer puppies. Although Jack is quite cute as babies go. He's got the tiniest little hands and fingernails, like a doll's, and he has quite a bit of dark hair. I wasn't expecting that. I don't know why. And he's so small and... She'd been about to add cute again, but she stopped herself just in time. She did not want to turn into one of those women who went on and on about babies, boring the pants off everyone around them. And this wasn't even her baby, for goodness sake. Ilana was looking at her curiously. You're actually quite smitten, aren't you? What was it like being a birth partner? Sam let her mind flick back over the past 48 hours. It was kind of what you'd expect. There was a lot of waiting about and a lot of shouting. From Abby, not me, obviously. Although it was quite painful for me, too. She pulled up the sleeve of her blouse and showed Ilana the bruising on her left forearm. Ouch. Yes, that's what I said. She paused. It was also totally not what I expected. The end bit was amazing. I wasn't prepared for that. Ilana screwed up her face. The emotions, I mean. It was overwhelming. I felt really privileged to be there. I mean, usually a maternity unit's the last place I'd choose to be. Although I was glad that Abby had changed her mind about the home birth bit, which was what she had planned. I was never so keen on that as she was. It's much better to know there are plenty of experts on hand. Ilana was nodding. I bet. I'm never having kids, though. From what everyone says, the birth is the easy bit. It's all downhill after that. Motherhood wasn't something that had ever featured largely in her life plans. Also, she'd need a man, and she was single and had every intention of staying that way. Robbie and I are planning to have 2 once we've got our own place, although it's taking forever to save the deposit. There's nothing round here that's affordable. Even the tiniest flat's a premium price. People buy them as holiday homes, don't they? Sam commiserated. The downside of living in one of the most beautiful parts of Dorset, I guess. She knew she was really lucky. If Beach Cottage had been in a pristine state of repair, Ben Campbell, her landlord, could have got double the rent. Luckily, he was too lazy to do more than the basic essentials, and he didn't need the money anyway. He did something that made megabucks in the city, and already owned more than one property. Beach Cottage would one day be his pension, he had told her. But in the meantime, he was more than happy for Sam to live in it. In fact, she'd be doing him a favour because he trusted her to take good care of it. Changing the subject completely, Ilana said suddenly, I've just remembered we caught another mouse in the back utility room this morning. Did you get rid of the others? Yep, Sam remembered the field mouse, heading up the hospital ramp and frowned. Although possibly not in the best place. The traps are still in my car. Shall I bring them in? No, it's okay. Later's fine. I'm not putting any more out. That's the first one we've caught for a couple of days. I think we may be on top of things. Rex has stopped muttering about getting the council in. Good. I'll go and get it while you finish your typing. Ilana might be a geek girl, but she was eminently practical too. She disappeared and Sam went back to her survey and realised that Mumbling Mike was wrapping up and almost onto the disclaimer section of the survey, which was part of their standard letter. She was done by the time Ilana came back with the mousetrap. Sam, if you like, I could drop this off in Wareham Forest on my way home. Then you can get on with picking up Abby and Jack. Do you have to go home first? Thanks, yes. I need to get the car seat and stuff. She only just texted to tell me she's ready. She's been on the phone to everyone, apparently, announcing the new arrival. Her parents live in Spain, but her brother's local. Ilana clapped her hands. How exciting, having a little one in the house. I bet you're really looking forward to seeing them both. Yes, Sam said, realising with surprise that she very much was. Chapter 3. One of the other good things about her job was that it was close to home, so she could get back for lunchtime dog walking, Sam thought, as she walked out to her Chevrolet in Fielding's almost empty car park. She and Abby often joked that she had a 57 Chevy because the first part of the number plate was HG57, but her car was actually an old black hatchback with 4 doors and a big enough space in the back to get a medium-sized golden retriever in, standing up. If the back seats were folded flat, you could get an Irish wolfhound and a golden retriever in the back. The wolfhound had to hunker down a bit as he jumped in, but it was doable. Sam knew this because she'd tried it. Seamus, a shaggy grey gentle giant of a dog, and Goldie, his bossy female companion, were 2 of her regular canine customers. She walked them 2 lunchtimes a week when their owner, Barbara Oldfield, who reminded Sam of a young Fiona Bruce, was working. She also house-sat for them sometimes.
I know they could go to kennels, Barbara said, but they trust you, and so do I.
The house-sitting at Barbara's had evolved into Sam having the 2 dogs at Beach Cottage on the occasional weekend. She had use of the field abutting the big garden, so there was plenty of space, and the dogs were just as happy there. She also boarded other animals that didn't need her to be around 24/7. Barbara had a friend with horses. They'd stayed once at Livery because their owners had wanted to bring their horses on holiday with them to Studland. The riding was amazing. Beach rides and forest rides were both accessible directly from Sam's field. The Isle of Purbeck, which wasn't an island, but a peninsula with water on 3 sides, the English Channel to the south and the east, and Poole Harbour and the marshlands of the River Frome to the north, was a tourist paradise. It was chock-a-block with pubs, restaurants, cafes and hotels and attractions like Monkey World Ape Rescue Centre. Sam had tried to get a job there once, but there was a huge waiting list, and the Tank Museum at Bovington. Sam had never visited Bovington, let alone tried to get a job there, but each to their own. The tourists came for the stunning coastal beauty spots like Durdle Door, an impressive archway through limestone rock at Lulworth Cove, not to mention the man-made attractions like Swanage Railway, where you could have a slap-up meal on a steam train while travelling past an unforgettable view of Corfe Castle, built by William the Conqueror and still hugely impressive, even in ruins. Another reason Sam would have hated to lose her job at Fielding's was because it was one of the few places she could work that didn't involve being around members of the public 24/7. She'd had a brilliant childhood, but she felt as though she'd grown up in a business, not a family home. Her parents ran Belinda's B&B, named after her mother, which was close to Swanage seafront. They loved it. Her dad was a born front-of-house man. He was brilliant at putting people at their ease by being totally interested in them and making silly jokes, mostly at his own expense. Her mum was an ace cook and a gifted artisan who could turn her hand to all kinds of creative projects, from upcycling a piece of furniture to making a patchwork quilt. She was also a great person to have around in a crisis because she was level-headed and calm. Sam had inherited her mother's level-headedness, but not her creative flair. She often wished it had been the other way round. Cooking and crafting would be a far more useful skill to have than the ability to keep calm in a crisis, although she supposed it had come in pretty handy when Abby had been in labour. But the flip side of being a peacemaker was people-pleasing. Over the years, Sam had watched her parents turn themselves inside out to please other people. She didn't want to spend her life doing the same thing. People were fine in small doses, but her real passion was for animals. Anything that was 4-legged and furry, anything that woofed, meowed, neighed or squeaked. She had a small menagerie when she was younger. Guinea pigs, a rabbit, a Jack Russell Terrier called Spot, and a ginger cat called Felix. Hers wasn't the kind of family that could afford a pony, although she had blagged rides at the local riding school in return for helping out. She'd had dreams of being a vet, but she'd known full well that her parents couldn't afford to put her through vet school, and so she hadn't even mooted the idea. Instead, when she'd finished her A-levels, she'd done a small animal husbandry course alongside a basic IT skills course. Then, for a couple of years, she'd worked on the admin side of a magazine called Dogs R Us, which had been started by a husband and wife team of entrepreneur publishers based in Poole, but which had unfortunately been axed because of low circulation. It was at Dogs R Us she'd met Ben Campbell. He'd been part of the sales team. They'd dated for a while before drifting apart, but had stayed friends. When the magazine had closed, Ben had moved from Poole, where he'd grown up, to London to become a commodities broker, a job he'd excelled at, and he'd soared into the stratosphere as far as income had gone. He'd bought Beach Cottage with one of his annual bonuses. Sam's jaw had literally dropped when he'd taken her there for the first time. The 3-bedroom property was one of the oldest in Studland Village, a Grade 2 listed period cottage, the colour of vanilla ice cream with a thatched roof. It looked like a child's painting of a cottage, with smiley-faced frontage and a messy thatched fringe. Inside, it needed a new kitchen and a new bathroom. The plumbing was temperamental, and the back cloakroom at the lowest part of the house flooded when the water table was high. But luckily, the ground floor was mostly flagstones, so it didn't matter too much. All of these inconveniences could be forgiven totally as far as Sam was concerned because of its amazing location. It was on a quiet road, within walking distance of the beach, and looked out across pasture meadows towards Old Harry Rocks, 3 great chalk formations that jutted out of the sea, marking the most eastern part of the Jurassic coast. Legend had it that Old Harry was a devil that had once slept on the rocks, and the smaller white chalk stack alongside him was his wife. Sam didn't care much for legends, but it was certainly an impressive set of rocks and a great story for the tourists, her mother always said. There was a footpath a stone's throw from the cottage, which led through woodland to an idyllic white sandy beach and was very handy for walking dogs. If you walked far enough to the left at low tide towards the chain ferry that linked the Isle of Purbeck to Bournemouth, you reached the golden sands of Studland. There was a naturist beach en route. If you went right, you would end up at Old Harry Rocks. Beach Cottage was everything Sam had ever wanted in a house. She'd lived there for 5 years, and every time she drew up outside it, she felt the same thrill of pleasure as she glanced up at the lime-washed vanilla walls, the pretty hanging baskets on either side of the duck egg blue front door, and the wooden house sign with the picture of a fat seagull on one corner. Never live in a house that doesn't make your heart sing, her mum had told her once. Sam had to pinch herself sometimes to believe she truly lived here and wasn't dreaming. She had that feeling tonight as she stepped out of her car and into the honeysuckle-scented air and was instantly surrounded by the sounds of birdsong and the more distant haunting cries of the gulls. She let herself in, ran along the flagstone hall and into the wood-beamed lounge, found the car seat propped against the inglenook fireplace, and was out again in the midsummer air. She was really looking forward to fetching Abby and Jack home. On the way to pool, she phoned her mum, hands-free from the car. "Give them both my best, darling. It's so exciting having a new baby in the house, and what a privilege to be there to hold her hand. I hope he doesn't keep you both awake all night." Sam put the phone down, smiling. A couple of hours later, Sam was feeling slightly less peaceful. Abby had been buoyant when she'd picked them up, but since they'd got back, her mood had dipped lower and lower. Sam had just gone into the lounge to find her in tears. "Darling, what is it? Is Jack all right?" "Jack's fine. He's asleep." She gestured with her hand towards the carry-cot, and Sam saw that he was breathing peacefully. Long dark eyelashes curled against his cheeks, his face serene. She sat down on the sofa beside her best friend. "So what's wrong?" "Everything's wrong. I'm a hopeless mother. I can't hold him properly. I can't relax around him. I made a right pig's ear of changing his nappy. I can't get him to stop crying. I can't comfort him." Her voice was growing more anguished by the second. "I don't know what to do." "But he's not crying now. He's asleep. He looks ever so peaceful. Look at him." "That's because he's so exhausted, I expect." Abby was the one who looked exhausted, but Sam didn't think pointing this out would help. She held her hand instead. "It's all so new. It's a big adjustment. It's bound to be emotional, and it must be difficult with your mum and dad in Spain. When are they coming over?" "Not for a couple of weeks. I told Mum I needed to get into a routine first, which I do. I'm used to them not being here. Anyway, I've got to get used to doing things alone," she sniffed. "My horoscope said, 'Go it alone.'" Those bloody horoscopes had a lot to answer for. "This is just the baby blues, darling. They said it would be like this at the classes, remember?" Abby blew her nose with the crumpled-up tissue she was clutching. "No, but maybe I didn't listen properly. I don't know. I'm not like you." One of the reasons Sam and Abby got on so well was because they were so different. Sam was a planner. If she was embarking on something new, from buying a new car to moving house to setting up in business, she would gather information. She would consult her friends, read every book, blog, and feature going, watch vlogs, go in chat rooms, make lists, and then decide on the best way forward. Abby liked to do things on the spur of the moment. She found plans and structure and lists tedious and said they stifled her creativity. She designed websites and website interfaces for a living. She was innovative and brilliantly original and very good at her job, and she hated being tied down with rules and regulations. "Shouldn't you be seeing to animals and stuff?" Abby asked, turning tear-washed eyes towards her. "They're only the rabbits. They won't take me long." The lop-eared rabbits, which belonged to a family in the village, were in the run in the garden. Fortunately, they were not time-intensive guests. "Go and sort them out, honey. I'm fine, honestly." She gave Sam a little shove, and Sam went reluctantly. After Sam had checked the rabbits were secure and made sure their water and food were topped up, they were doing a great job on her grass, she went back into the farmhouse kitchen and cooked frozen pizzas for her and Abby's tea. The range oven was wasted on her. Then they spent the rest of the evening focused on Jack, who slept soundly throughout, and watching YouTube videos on baby's first days. It was amazing what you could find on YouTube. Abby practiced nappy changing, while Sam read posts from new mum sites and shared helpful tips. When he woke, Jack was amazingly obliging. He was a happy little thing, and while he was quite vocal, giving little squaws and snuffles, he didn't cry or screech. He just gazed at Abby adoringly while she breastfed him, and Sam felt a twinge of what she had felt back in the hospital, awe, joy, and that intense feeling of peace and wonder that was almost holy. "Do you think he's too laid back for a Cancerian?" Abby brought her back to earth with a bang. "Cancerian babies are supposed to be moody and clingy. Do you think maybe that means there's something wrong?" She sounded slightly panicky again. "No, he's probably a bit young to be showing his star sign traits. I think you're worrying too much." "Do you think so?" "Yes, he's just laid back." "He certainly doesn't get that from me." Her voice was wistful. Sam said, as casually as she could because it was a contentious subject, "Have you heard from Paul? Have you told him Jack's arrived?" She'd wanted to raise it before, but they'd almost fallen out last time she'd tried. "Nope."